It was 2019 when journalist Emily Maitlis sat down for that car crash interview with then Prince Andrew.
She described dancing with you and you profusely sweating, and that she went on to have bath, possibly.
There's a slight problem with the sweating because I have a peculiar medical condition, which is that I don't sweat.
It was the beginning of the end for the Prince.
It's a huge moment for the royal family. Prince Andrew is stepping back from royal duties as the fallout from his BBC Newsnight interview continues.
Now, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor has again hit the headlines, this time for allegedly sharing secret trade documents with Jeffrey Epstein. And as the fallout from the Epstein files threatens to take down everyone from ambassadors to prime ministers, Emily Maitlis again has a front row seat as the saga unfolds.
I mean, this is, I would say, probably one of the biggest political corruption scandals we've ever seen in our lifetime.
Keir Starmer described it in the cabinet meetings.
I'm Nicole Johnston, and you're listening to 7am. Today, Emily Maitlis from the Newsagents podcast on Andrew, the Epstein files, and how Trump is reshaping Europe. It's Wednesday, February 18. So, Emily, a lot has happened since your infamous interview with then Prince Andrew over the Epstein scandal. There's now pressure on police to investigate Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor. Why hasn't that happened?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, there's that phrase that's used in sort of political theory, which is slowly and then suddenly. And that feels like where we are now. Things could have started 6 years ago, but they didn't. And I think human nature is not to do anything until you have to. And now everyone is kind of looking at whether it's the politics, whether it's the DOJ in the US, whether it's the palace here, everyone is now looking and saying, what's going on? Why aren't you moving quickly? And that's why things are happening. So I guess the pressure has come from the victims themselves for so long. And I guess now we've got all the Epstein files. It's on us. It's on us as journalists and reporters, and it's on the prosecutors and the lawyers and the institutions like Congress and the Metropolitan Police and the palace to say, yeah, we hear you. We're doing this now.
So, Emily, with that crescendo really building, how does the British public feel about Andrew now that all of this has come to light? And how does it affect how they also see the royals more broadly?
I think the tide turned on Andrew pretty quickly after that relationship with Epstein was exposed. And I would say that we didn't really understand Epstein. You know, for years, there was this sort of shadowy name. We'd had our own scandal. We had the Jimmy Savile scandal. He was the worst paedophile any of us could ever imagine. And Epstein was kind of like somebody else's problem. You know, it was over there. We didn't really get it. But I think now we really understand the depth and the breadth of the depravity and of that power circle.
Pictures appearing to show Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor crouched over an unidentified woman are featured in the latest disclosure of files linked to the late American sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The images are among more than
And I think that there is a fury, actually. There is a fury around Andrew and what was tolerated for so long. And obviously, I have to say, he denies all wrongdoing. That is something that every journalist still puts as an addendum in all their reporting. And we will stick to that because legally that is the case. But if you ask me about public perception, yeah, it's not great. It's not great. And my sense is that King Charles knows that this is a really delicate moment, actually, for the monarchy.
King Charles' first public appearance since the latest Epstein files release. This was inevitable.
Your Majesty, will your family help with the Epstein investigation?
I think there is still a proper, solid majority in favour of the monarchy and the royal family, but there are more questions about transparency, more questions about the money being spent. But I do think that the King feels that this is a fairly critical moment, actually. And I think that's why we've seen such dramatic steps in the last 6 months, even before the release of the Epstein files, the removal of the titles, removal of the housing and Royal Lodge and all the rest of it, I think was the King sort of saying, yeah, I'm not going to be party to this. I'm not going to let you bring down the whole house.
And look, aside from the royal family, the Epstein files have obviously been causing huge political problems for the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. He's been blamed for appointing Lord Peter Mandelson as US ambassador.
I am sorry. Sorry for what was done to you. Sorry that so many people with power failed you. Sorry for having believed Mandelson's lies and appointed him.
So could you take us through what we know about Mandelson and the Epstein files?
So the appointment of Lord Mandelson in January of last year was not, and I should say it was not greeted by howls of condemnation at the time. If you look at the press, there were different people saying, oh, well, is he the right man for the job? He's too close to Europe. Is he the right man for the job? He's too close to China. But people weren't at that point talking about his relationship with Epstein. And I do think that's important to remember. But it became apparent last September that he had a much closer relationship with Epstein than anyone had realised. And I think the clangor was when we realised that he had been serving as business secretary. He'd been brought in by Gordon Brown's government just after the financial crash. And he still somehow deemed it wise to call up Jeffrey Epstein to stay at his house in New York whilst Jeffrey Epstein was serving a prison sentence. Now, the idea that there was a person right at the heart of government who was a sort of de facto deputy prime minister who still thought it was okay to be hanging out and hanging in the house of Jeffrey Epstein whilst Epstein was in prison was something that I think the Prime Minister then found it impossible to ignore, and he was fired by Keir Starmer. And the story might have ended there, but the release of the files has shown us how much worse it was. That it wasn't just that Mandelson was staying in Epstein's house. It wasn't just that he'd lied about the length and the intensity of that relationship. But it was the fact, as we are now led to believe from these emails, that Mandelson appeared to be pushing government, business, speeches, decisions, policies directly towards Epstein before the British public even knew about them. Epstein knew about the Euro bailout that was meant to save the banking system in the financial crash before we did. Epstein knew about Gordon Brown's resignation before we did. And that has just put it in a whole different category. It is something that I don't think anyone could have imagined, that you would have a de facto deputy prime minister working against the interests of the British government in the years following the greatest financial crash we've ever seen, when our country was absolutely on its knees, and would be taking what he knew to a billionaire before his own country.
Coming up, why 2028 could be a turning point for the world. Emily, if we could move on to the Munich Security Conference that we just had on the weekend. Now, last year we had that sort of shocking speech from J.D. Vance to the European leaders.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat.
Everyone was waiting to see what would be said this time round, but the US, it seems it did tone down its message, sending Secretary of State Marco Rubio How are European leaders, including the UK, responding to that message from the US out of Munich, especially after what happened in Venezuela and Greenland? Are they buying any of it?
I mean, look, Marco is the sort of family-friendly cabinet member. He's the one that they sort of allowed loose at Munich this year after how badly JD Vance went down last year. But I'm not sure that in substance there was anything very different.
We want allies who are proud of their culture and of their heritage, who understand that we are heirs to the same great and noble civilization, and who together with us are willing and able to defend it.
I spent last week with an EU ambassador and a NATO foreign minister, and I was asking about the whole relationship with America now. And I'm starting to sense there is a kind of creeping distaste amongst some leaders with the way Mark Rutte is sort of handling things, NATO Secretary General, because the whole sort of, pacification of Trump, which has been going on now for a year, and we saw it in The Hague last June, the NATO gathering, where Mark Rutte was sort of calling Trump daddy and all the rest of it.
He's quite fawning.
Well, it was fawny and it was it's quite hard to listen to.
Stop him. Let him fight for about 2-3 minutes. Then it's easier to stop him.
And then daddy has to sometimes use strong language.
You have to use strong language. Every once in a while you have to use.
And I think that might have worked for the week. Trump went off happy in June, but it didn't stop anything. It didn't stop Trump still turning on NATO. It didn't stop Trump from still threatening to invade Greenland. It didn't stop Trump from saying, I don't believe that NATO would come to America's rescue. It didn't stop Trump from virtually anything that he'd kind of considered doing. I don't know that sort of pandering to whatever Trump decides this week is necessarily going to be a secure footing for the EU or for NATO or for our future sort of autonomy on defence or spending. And so my sense is that people came away from Munich more relieved this year than they did last year. But I think the bigger questions, the existential questions remain, which is America still an active ally for NATO? Is it still a place that you would trust? Do you believe that he's going to leave Greenland alone? Do you believe that he's going to leave Canada alone? And so I think that NATO would be foolish to think that everything had calmed down just because they sent Marco Rubio. And I think that they probably wouldn't do themselves any favours by thinking that things are all going to go back to normal if they do what Trump says.
And Emily, I mean, it's pretty clear that that's what the Munich Security Conference thinks. They put out that report talking about this new era with a lust for destruction, that the international order is under threat. Is Europe divided, though, about what to do about it? And what do you think all of this actually means for the world order as we've known it and as Europe's known it since 1945? Europe's asking itself some really big questions now. I mean, the divide is between those countries that border Russia and those countries that are much further south. And if you talk to EU leaders from Spain and from Portugal and from Greece, they'll say the biggest problem for Europe is immigration. The northern countries don't understand what it's like to have this influx of migrants, particularly from the Middle East, particularly from Africa. We're right at the forefront of that. We're having to deal with that day in and day out. If you talk to the Poles and the Estonians, the Finns, the people who actually border Russia, they say, we've got a war on our border. Our defence spending is already above 5%. Our defence spending, we've already got conscription. We've already got literally, young men and women in our villages who are armed, who know that they may have to respond at any moment to an incursion by Russia. And so you can see how Europe is sort of facing two different directions at the moment. Is it the end of the old order? I was talking to somebody who was very close, a Clinton advisor actually last week, who said 2028 is going to be the most important presidential election of any of our lifetimes, because that is the point at which we will work out whether it was Trump and it was Trump only, MAGA lived and died with Trump, or whether that is the future direction.
And I think that's why the Democrats know that this is a really risky time. 2028, if they're not in power then they've basically waved goodbye to the old world order.
Emily, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Emily Maitlis will appear in Melbourne, presented by the Wheeler Centre on March 5, and at the All About Women Festival in Sydney on March 8. Also in the news, police are investigating after a stabbing spree that left one person dead and 2 critically injured in Western Sydney. Witnesses have described sprinting to escape a man, they say, stabbed multiple people at random on a busy street in Maryland. A man has been arrested. And the PM says he has no sympathy for a group of 34 Australian women and children trying to return home from Syria. The women, known as the ISIS brides, have been stuck in a Syrian detention camp for 7 years, trying and failing this week to come back to Australia. But Albanese says the government won't be repatriating the group, who have links to Islamic State fighters. I'm Nicole Johnston. This is 7am. Thanks for listening.